Brilliant. So this session is all about how to support all learners with reading. It should be a brilliant session. We've got lots of people presenting on this and we've got a lot of knowledge and information to share. And we're really keen to have your questions at the end as well. Next slide. So this is who's presenting. So we've got Nicola Romaine, who is the National English Lead for Twinkl. You've got myself, Georgina Durrant. You've got Emma Fitzgerald, who is the Educational Content Lead for Twinkl Originals, which are our brilliant books, and Pete Lambden, who is the Educational Content Lead for Twinkl Originals, again, our brilliant books. And in this session, we're going to cover up-to-date guidance on supporting all readers, resources and strategies to support developing readers to access stories and texts, research on the best uses of digital reading materials, inclusive ways to promote a love of reading for all learners, ideas to support readers for whom English is an additional language, and my favourite bit, because that's the bit I'm doing, strategies to support and include readers with SEND. So there's an action-packed hour. Hopefully you get lots of this out of it. So over to Nicola, who is presenting on the current picture for developing readers.
Hi everyone, thanks Georgina. Great to be here again today, and I just want to spend the next couple of minutes really just talking about where we're at with developing readers and what the support is out there at the moment and what everything's telling, what guidance and the landscape is telling us. So thanks to guidance such as, oh, next slide please Pete, sorry. Thank you. So thanks to guidance such as the DFE's reading framework and others, there's that really growing awareness among educators and parents about the importance of evidence-based reading instructions to ensure that all readers are given the best chance of becoming proficient readers who love reading. So things like systematic synthetic phonics has rightfully gained recognition as a cornerstone for developing decoding skills, leading to improved implementation within many schools. And then the significance of early identification and intervention for struggling readers is now more widely understood, allowing for that timely support, which is all important. And then complementing those advancements, teachers and parents now benefit from that wide array of resources and support, much of which we can help you with actually at Twinkl, empowering them to effectively nurture children's reading development. So it's a really positive picture in that respect. Next slide, please, Pete. So whilst those advancements in early literacy are really evident, you know, and that's really positive, we still have persistent challenges. So one of those things is that significant gap between proficient and struggling readers and what to do about that, which disproportionately affects children from disadvantaged backgrounds. So although phonics instruction has strengthened, a continued emphasis on developing fluency and comprehension alongside decoding is really crucial. Achieving equity, ensuring that all children receive high quality reading instruction regardless of their background is paramount. And to this end, ongoing professional development for teachers is really essential and needs to be, you know, really focused on empowering everybody with effective teaching strategies. Also, parental involvement, as we know, is really important and very impactful, reinforcing learning within the home environment as well. And then finally, regular assessment and monitoring are really important for tracking progress and providing targeted support and providing timely interventions for struggling readers, ensuring that no child is left behind. Thanks, Pete. So a couple of quotes on the slide there. We have a quote from the National Literacy Trust and one from the DFE's reading framework, which I mentioned a few moments ago. So Ofsted emphasises the critical role of early and effective reading intervention as well, and their focus is on schools identifying struggling readers, implementing evidence-based support and measuring the impact to ensure all children make progress. Just circling back to what I said on the previous slide about that early identification and how important that is. And then finally from me, thanks Pete, a few kind of images there on the slide around that evidence-based approach to teaching reading. So we have there the science of reading, the reading, Scarborough's reading rope, and the simple view of reading, as we know in the DfE's reading framework. And that's all based around the simple view of reading. But in addition to that, we have the context of the science of reading, which offers valuable insights into how children learn to read. And that emphasises the importance of explicit instruction and practice. It also highlights that reading comprehension relies on both accurate word recognition and strong language comprehension skills, which obviously is what the simple view of reading tells us. Effective reading instruction should also include, and we see this in Scarborough's reading rope a little bit more clearly, actually, the explicit teaching of phonological awareness and phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. Again, coming back to that early intervention, it's really, really crucial that these tools that you can see on the screen are utilised and used in order to be able to pinpoint reading barriers and to help us to address those reading difficulties in a particular area of reading. You know, that could be phonics, it could be fluency, it could be comprehension. So by utilising evidence-based practices from that science of reading, we can really provide effective and targeted reading instruction and support. So we're in a really great space at the moment, actually, that we've got all of this evidence that we can draw on to make really great decisions around reading intervention and targeted practices for all children, ensuring that everybody has the opportunity to become a proficient reader. And I believe I'm now handing over to you, Emma.
Yes, thank you. I've just made a different form that hopefully works, and I put that in the chat. So please do use that at some point during the session or at the end to access your book. But please also at the end let us know if that didn't work either, and we'll come up with plan C. Yes, so my slides. I am talking about how to support developing readers. Yes, so I'm going to start by talking about our phonics scheme. Well, the power of phonics in general. Although I'm the educational content lead for Twinkl Originals at the moment, which is focused more on books to read aloud and reading for pleasure, I was also part of the team that worked on our DfE validated phonics scheme. So I'm just going to talk about the fact that you need phonics and that we have some resources to help you with that. Evidence shows that teaching phonics is the best way to teach children to read words. The Education Endowment Foundation considers phonics to be one of the best evidence and most secure areas of pedagogy. If you're teaching the national curriculum in England, you are required to use a systematic synthetic phonics scheme. And as the reading framework says here, that's for children of all ages who are learning to read. I think there's sometimes a misconception that phonics stops after the year 1 screening check, but if children haven't mastered phonics, they still need it beyond that. In year 2, there's lots of phonics learning that still happens, and it can be useful way above year 2 if children haven't yet mastered the alphabetic code. Next slide, please, Pete. And the DfE is really clear in their recommendations that all pupils should be ideally keeping up with your school's one chosen phonics program. It's really important to keep fidelity to the one program and use that as your teaching for all of your children so that they don't get confused. And you should try to ensure that they've got their GPC, their grapheme phoneme correspondence covered before they begin blending to read words. So make sure that you've practiced reading graphemes speedily, recognizing them, having that automaticity when they see a grapheme and knowing what it is before you move on to actually using them to blend to read words. We've also got some useful resources for helping you track children's progress. Again, the DfE is really clear that individual records of progress are vital for all children as you teach them phonics, to work out where those gaps are, whether they're small gaps that a child might need to revisit or bigger areas where you think actually they need a little bit more support, they need a bigger intervention. If that's the best way to identify those gaps and children that might be at risk of not passing the phonics screening check, rather than say whole class records or group records. Next slide, please, Pete. Despite your best phonics teaching, not all children will make progress at the same rate. For some to make progress at their own rate, they might need extra practice. This can be same day interventions for children who might not have quite grasped that day's phonics teaching. The best thing you can do is try to address that as quickly as possible. And for some children, it might be just those same day interventions they need to catch back up with the rest of the class and carry on, or they might need something a little bit more sustained. So for others, a longer intervention, revisiting the previous level, will be most beneficial. And this should ideally be tailored to the needs of the children in your group or class. Some will work in small groups, whereas others might benefit from more targeted one-to-one support so that they can feel success. We do have Twinkl Phonics interventions for EYFS Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, which are fully scripted to support your adult. And I think that's particularly useful for if you've got new staff or staff that might have come down from year 6 to Key Stage 1 and are not as familiar with phonics. Having those scripts can make all the adults teaching these interventions feel a lot more confident that they're definitely providing the right foundations. Next slide, please, Pete. And the DFE recommends that these interventions in this extra practice should be with a well-trained adult. We know that's not always possible if you've had staff changes or a lot of recruitment, or someone leaves suddenly, you might have cover instead of your main support staff. So we do actually have Twinkl Phonics training that can fill some gaps and equip your team with the phonics fundamentals. And again, we can tailor that to your needs, whether it's mainstream school, it might be specialist provision, Key Stage 1 or Key Stage 2. And when you're doing your interventions, ideally they would happen in a quiet place at a regular time every day. And the DFE is really clear that this should be a school priority. Phonics should be a whole school priority. And it should be consistent with the school's mainstream phonics program. So if you're using Twinkl Phonics or Read Write Inc., you shouldn't then be using doing interventions with Jolly Phonics, for example. Try to use the same scheme, the same intervention, so everything they're learning is consistent. And now I think I'm handing over to Pete.
Thanks, Emma. So yeah, just going to talk a little bit now about as children progress past year 2 into year 3, year 4 and beyond, and perhaps how phonics then looks for those children. So the fact is that actually phonics is beneficial for anyone who lacks the foundational decoding skills necessary for reading, and that's regardless of age. There was a time, I remember it back when I was in the classroom, there was a time when there was a slight theory going around that there's an absolute age, that there's a window, but the general perceived wisdom now is that's not the case. So phonics will still work, but where it won't work is a lot of the things that Emma has just said. Issues with inconsistent or poorly implemented phonics instruction, which often is not the class educator or school's fault. It's the resources needed. Emma's just gone over the fact that it all needs time ring fenced, but that's the way to crack this. It's consistent time with a consistent program. Now, one thing that as children get older becomes a little bit difficult is how do you find something that matches the reading skill with something that's going to appeal to them, and even not just appeal to them, but not put them off, because children at the age of 7, 8, 9 will not want to read a phonics book about a cat in a pond. And in fact, that's going to have a negative effect of kind of engaging them. So have a look around for these schemes, these books, these things that I've got obviously going to plug Twinkl here, but things like Twinkl have developed, like decoders, where the key is to provide age appropriate interventions. So these books that we've tried to design for children of that age to be engaged with, yet they still follow very, very closely our SSP that we provide here. And that's the key. It's really important to make sure that we've kind of done that and offered them the right thing to engage them, which often is all it comes back to, really. So they should continue to be the decodable. Everything Emma's just said, it's got to be the GPCs, blending, all in that correct kind of like systematic way, age appropriate. Also, providing the system and instruction is well executed, and again, important to train and give all staff working in this way the time and the resources they need, which again is, as I understand, a lot easier said than done in schools. But it's definitely something to consider, and it's that sort of very simple yet effective idea that a little bit every day of targeted intervention with a book that engages the child, that's gonna make all the difference there. Back to you, Emma.
Thanks, Pete. So I'm going to move on to talking about reading beyond phonics. I don't know how many of you will have read this, but I had a read through the Ofsted report on English called Telling the Story. And these are some of the things that I pulled out that I thought were interesting for people who are looking to improve reading in schools or with individual children. It said that some schools do not make sure that all pupils have enough opportunities to hear texts being allowed. So I think that's one of the issues, text being read to children and story time not being prioritized, not being valued, perhaps people not understanding the learning that's going on there. Also, they identified that knowledge of language, including vocabulary, grammar, and syntax, is part of the foundational knowledge needed for reading, speech, and writing. So, of course, we've just talked about the value, the importance of a strong phonics scheme, and that should be at the core of your reading teaching. But also, these other elements are important. Where are we getting those? Are they being as highly valued, particularly in Key Stage 1, as phonics is? And also that once pupils are able to read accurately, schools are less clear about how to build fluency and comprehension. So we're going to have a look at some of the ways that we think you could be looking at that. And beyond phonics, there is little training for primary teachers to build their professional knowledge about English literature and language. So although we've just, again, talked about the benefits of phonics training, and we have some excellent phonics training, that shouldn't be the only training that your reading teachers, English teachers are receiving. Next slide, please, Pete. So what are the benefits of reading aloud? If you read aloud to your class, I'm talking all the way up to year 6, even beyond into secondary school, they have the opportunity to listen to and discuss the same text as their peers, which they might not be able to do when reading independently. So they get to engage in those rich discussions. The reading framework recommends 4 story time sessions focused ideally on reading for pleasure of 20 minutes per week. So that's in EYFS, Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, and perhaps beyond. These sessions allow learners to access higher level vocabulary, new knowledge, and more complex plots than they can access independently. I'm sure you all know that when you're reading your earliest decoders as a new reader, the language that you're exposed to is very limited by the sounds that you know. You're reading single words made up of 3 letters, for example, cat, dog, sit. You're probably not learning new words, exciting words. You're not necessarily hearing the rhythm of how wonderful language can be. You're probably accessing quite a simple plot because it's probably quite a short story, whereas listening to a full book, perhaps read by an adult in your life, you can really understand how does a story work, how does it start, how does it finish, what happens that makes a story exciting. And when they're listening to stories, they can also develop in other reading areas without being held back by their decoding level. They might need extra support with decoding, but they also might be really good at comprehension, understanding, talking about what they're hearing and having really rich discussions with their teachers, other adults, or the other children around them. If they just read books independently at their decoding level, they're being limited in other areas where they can make progress and they can develop. Next slide, please, Pete. Also, reading aloud to children indirectly impacts on their fluency in a good way. When listening, they hear, for example, how the reader uses punctuation to pause, stop, or exclaim, and that will help them when they're doing those things. They hear how a reader can use their voice to convey tone. They can hear, for example, how a question sounds different to a command. They're seeing what you're doing, how you're using the text, then they're taking it in, understanding all those different skills. Perhaps if they reread that text that they've heard, they can try replicating those things for themselves. The reading framework recommends that children listen without following the text, especially on your first reading. asking too many questions, having quite a lot of interruptions, can really take the children out of the story, actually negatively impact their comprehension, their understanding, but also their enjoyment of what's happening. So if you do need to pause, maybe to just explain a new piece of vocabulary, that's fine, but try not to do too many interruptions. And you can always return to the story later if you did want to dive into the vocabulary more, or look at sentence structure or expanded noun phrases or whatever it is. You can do that in later sessions, or you can do that in your English lessons. You can pick that up after, but make sure that your story times are really just valuable, enjoyable, engaging storytelling sessions. Next slide, please, Pete. And as I've said earlier, when you're reading aloud to children, it's one of their best opportunities to hear vocabulary. They're likely to hear vocabulary that they're not hearing in everyday conversation, and they're definitely going to be getting vocabulary that they're not getting from their decodable readers, especially when they're developing readers. And decoding a word that you have heard before and actually understand is far more useful and satisfying than trying to decode a word that you don't know. Even if you do decode a word that you don't know and you've done it successfully, you might not feel very successful because the word has no meaning for you. You don't understand that you've read the word. And reading to children before and during their phonics journey will support their progress. So it doesn't mean that you read to them and then when they start doing phonics, then they only read independently. They should continue to happen alongside each other. A gap in vocabulary or language does not necessarily mean that your systematic phonics program should be delayed. It can happen in tandem at the same time. And the DFE is really clear that this does not mean that pupils who have a gap in their vocabulary or language need a different kind of teaching for reading. They should still be getting SSP, but with all those lovely activities reading aloud that will bring on their vocabulary at the same time. And over to you, Pete.
Thanks, Emma. So yes, just a bit of a thought experiment, having a go at reading those 3 words, and question being, can you read these words? And there's something interesting about those, because in a way we could say that probably nobody can definitely read those words except for me, because I'm the one who knows what they mean, because I stuck them up there with no context whatsoever. The top one, that could be wind or it could be wind, lead or lead, content or content. And the purpose there, following on from what Emma's just said, is as children progress and become readers, we need to understand that the phonics doesn't happen in isolation anymore. It's all about that syntax, and that's where the fluency comes through. There is a particular amount of words that need to be held in that instant working memory that children can build up the skill of pulling back and forth from as they read. The wind blew through the trees. We've probably got that by the time we get to blue, because we've got it, wind blew. For a child, Claire likes to wind up her little sister. That's going to be more difficult, because even for us, I mean, as experienced readers, by the time we get to up, we've kind of got it. Okay, we've possibly even got it by the time we go Claire likes to. Our eyes have scanned ahead, we've got that. But for a child who perhaps doesn't even know the idea of wind up, they've maybe never heard that before, that could easily be wind up her little sister or something like that. So these are things as educators we have to kind of try to force ourselves to think and consider, because as we move beyond phonics, we're now talking about actively constructing meaning rather than passively just decoding every word. And we're all probably very familiar with this, where it sounds like a child has managed to decode perfectly, but then hasn't really gleaned not even the comprehension, just the general flow of that sentence. So what we're looking for in fluency is this active kind of, like, as I say, active building, but also a good thing to watch out for there is, as an educator, it's can the children catch these mistakes and fix them on the fly, as in fix them, understand, because they know the syntax. Emma's just covered a lot of how we can do this in terms of reading aloud, but we're going to have also look at how we can perhaps instruct it a bit more as educators. So sorry, bear with me. There we go. So again, worth returning to this idea of miscues and miscue analysis and that sort of thing, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, but if they're not, it's kind of like a queue is where it's a bit like a queuing system, as in that is my cue to fix the error I've made in my reading, or that's my cue to understand this. And when a child makes a miscue, it's perhaps they haven't quite fixed or caught that meaning and gone back to process the text. What we have to try and do as educators is pick up on those mistakes. Now, I guess a lot of people have kind of used, there's a lot of things out there. The one that springs to mind is like PM benchmarking and stuff like that, where you have a set test and an adult listens with the child and ticks off what the cues were and gives them a nice little score at the end. I think one of the key things to try to remember with that is try to use those sort of resources not as an assessment piece, but as a kind of like instructional for you as an educator, like allow it to open your eyes about how that child reads and what exactly they need to work on, or where the difficulties might be. For example, you can glean a lot from the fixing that the children do. So if they misread Tim as Tom, they have used semantic and syntactic cues there to understand it's a name. So something further to the simple active decoding has gone into the child's mind there as they read. However, if they were to read Tim as time, in a sentence, in which Tim is the name, then they don't go back to correct and they get struck. Then they do perhaps have used a bit of phonics knowledge, but they haven't quite grasped the semantic knowledge there. So if a pupil's faced with the word they're unsure of, if they search their memory for those cues, then that's sort of like the next step to becoming a bit of a stronger reader. A great way to develop fluency is as simple as rereading and returning to words. So developing readers, they have to basically the more you reread a text, the more time you've come across that word. So the more that children can do a text again and again, the more they can read at a glance. And that highlights the process of moving from conscious decoding to automatic word recognition, because with each repetition, the brain becomes more efficient at recognizing that word and built into that word as well, the morphemes, the graphemes, the little pieces that they'll be picking up again and again. And again, this is where that reading for pleasure perhaps folds back into this, that it is not a bad thing to read a text a lot of times, because it is just building that, even if the words are the same, that it's building that brain's ability to scan that sentence along and take them all in. And so the goal there being that reading, it's moving from a working memory to a long-term memory. It's putting and strengthening the neurons to make this a quick, fast, automated system in the mind. So just on the subject of reading for pleasure then, again, try to have a look at sort of if you have time to look at what sort of books are out there, what can you do to kind of make your class library or the books that children have got access to, or the books you're reading to them, a bit more interesting. Again, little plug like Twinkl's Leap into Chapters, but also thinking outside the box with stuff like the graphic novels that are so popular and only getting more popular at the minute. What can you do to sort of like look into finding books that give the most pleasure, so they're encouraged to read and therefore keep up that fluency practice. So then just to change tack ever so slightly on what we can do to support confident readers. So obviously a lot of the focus is on children that may be struggling or that maybe need targeted support. But one thing to just bear in mind is to keep an eye on children who are on track but do need an educator's guidance to stay that way, and especially here considering the jump from transition from primary school to secondary school. And so that what the key there is to help children, you know, as they go through year 4, 5, 6, and they're approaching that, help them recognize the value of reading. In the next few slides, we'll have a little look at some ways we can encourage reading for pleasure. But something that's also worth bearing in mind, I know the focus rightfully is on reading for pleasure for a great many reasons, but with secondary school in our minds, it's also worth just kind of educating and helping children understand the idea of reading for research, because something that can be overlooked is that reading has to be done. Yeah, we read for pleasure, and it's absolutely important to enjoy it, and that's the way to get children to do it. But there might be another reason to read. Like, if you're desperate to know about something that takes your interest, how do you get that information to read? And yeah, okay, I suppose that is an offshoot of reading for pleasure. But with secondary school in our minds, think about that first couple of weeks, first couple of months in year 7, when a child sits down in their science lesson and a textbook is flumped on in front of them, and a sort of a bit of an assumption that read page 7, that'll help you with today's lesson. And children kind of have to be prepared for that independent expectation in secondary school, and that's something you can kind of just help to work towards in primary school as well in those latter few years. And then generally reading for pleasure in school. So what's helpful all the way through is establishing a culture of reading. Strong staff CPD, using the staff, all staff in school, educators, office staff, everybody, as role models for reading. So displays on which books staff enjoy, talking about them, hosting little sessions where the children can ask and really see the adults in their lives enjoying reading and using reading as a means to get somewhere. Take a bit of time to curate the school book collection. There's a lot of, you can just Google sort of like school book collection lists, and people like the Book Trust and National Literature Trust, they'll have these lists. They'll also, a lot of places sort of run grants and stuff you can apply for to try and boost your school libraries. Organising author visits. Now, this is something that's vitally important, is to engage the reading for pleasure. One of the key things that needs to be in place is that children understand that there is a writer behind that thing they're reading, and the connection is made. And this person has written these words for me, and I'm now reading them, and there's a purpose both ways here. Now, organising author visits can be difficult, but a lot of the big publishers out there, like Penguin, Random House, and HarperCollins, if you sign up to their newsletters, obviously you'll get a few emails coming through, but they will give you these webinars you can dial into, in which an author is talking about their new book, or a selection of authors are talking about things, and they can be great things to join as a class. And finally, engaging the community. So having parents and community members visit the school, sharing book interests, that can be an excellent way of kind of promoting that culture within schools. Don't forget to as well to kind of look at ways to diversify the book list. Again, you can sort of get a lot of help with this by Googling online book lists in this way. And a lot of the publishers work hard to try to make sure there's a lot of books available to children. I know the reading framework does go into detail about trying to make sure children use books to hear different voices and experience worlds, you know, beyond their own. Twinkl work in partnership with Penguin, with their lit in colour scheme, in which they've got a lot of different books. And if you Google that with Twinkl, you can find our partnership resources on their books, and there's a link here in the slides, and also just including varied text types as well. Non-fiction are huge ones to bear in mind, that it's not always about fiction. And as I've mentioned, graphic novels and comics, just a huge way that you can move forward with this. Yes, passing over to Nicola with using digital resources.
Thank you. Hi, everybody again. So a couple of quotes here about digital reading and how digital reading can support the reluctant reader, and actually to consider when print might be better. So obviously we live in a digital world. Our students are surrounded by screens. more and more so, both at home and in school. And although that familiarity can be a powerful tool for engagement, you know, there is that balance as well of print and digital, which we're going to kind of delve into very quickly. So many reluctant readers might find traditional books intimidating or unappealing, and might find ebooks more accessible. You know, they warm to the experience of reading on a screen and making it feel like less like a chore and more like something to enjoy. So this stuff that I'm saying now isn't just anecdotal. You know, research really backs this up. A recent study by the UK's National Literacy Trust found that boys in particular became more avid and confident readers when they have access to ebooks. And that really aligns with what we often see in the classroom. As one teacher I was talking to recently put it, a lot of students, normally boys, consider reading boring and don't even want to attempt it, and ebooks can really change that. And part of that appeal, I think, lies in redefining what a book is. You know, for many students, a book doesn't have to be a physical object with pages. It can be a digital experience. And I think it's okay to say that that is okay, because it's interactive and it's engaging. And as we know, motivation and engagement are kind of everything when it comes to reading. And that shift in perception is really, really key. So, as I said, that the past decade or so has really explored, or provided the opportunity to really explore, the nature and impact of reading digitally. And whilst both print and digital have roles to play in schools, the evidence demonstrates that print continues to be important for that sustained critical reading. And I was really fortunate actually last year to speak with Naomi Barron, who is a former Guggenheim Fellow. She is a visiting scholar at the Stanford Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences as well. She has more than 30 years experience studying the effects of technology on language, including the ways that we speak, read, write and think. And I would really recommend that you read her work actually. And her latest book, published in 2021, How We Read Now, Strategic Choices for Print and Print, Screen and Audio, is a really good read, is really insightful. So there has been research beyond Naomi Barron's research. One piece of research, Sugar and Sugar, found that middle grade students comprehended more when reading print than when using ebooks on an iPad. The interactive features of the digital platform apparently distracted readers from that contextual content, but the same researchers observed that amongst kindergarten to sixth grade readers, ebooks generated a higher level of engagement. So it's about that balancing act, isn't it? In sum, that's what I'm saying. You know, there is a place for ebooks and reading digitally, particularly with boys, particularly with children who struggle more. You know, there are certain features on digital ebooks and so forth that really support disengaged readers and those children who have barriers to their reading. But by the same token, there is a place for print as well, and it's that kind of balance. Thanks, Pete. Over to you.
Thank you. And yeah, just a quick note then on the digital. Just something a little bit about audio there. So audio, it can be excellent for helping readers independently access text beyond their current decoding level. And again, there's quite a lot of research and thinking around the idea that the audio is very beneficial in this way. Again, it just gives that accessibility to books, which can really excite children. Once they know that they can read that book, it's something that can become quite special to them. And okay, it's perhaps not looking at the phonics and that side of things, but it is allowing children to access a lot of those other things. And actually, as children get older as well, if they do struggle with phonics, they can still, using audio, start to appreciate and experience some of those other things that are quite important with learning to read, like narrative devices and framing and things like that. And then just a quick look here. Sorry, my computer's decided it's going to slow because everybody's coming in from school. Yeah, so just looking at EAL children in class, just a little think about what we might need to do slightly different at times, depending on the child. The framework mentions that the key elements here are making sure we have a lot of talk and discussion, and explicit teaching of vocabulary with some careful, deliberate planning. So really thinking about what the EAL children in your class are going to need to know to tackle some reading. Talk is crucial, whether that be the educators thinking aloud and talking through the process to just bump up that amount of vocabulary that's out there, or paired in choral work and partner discussion with other children. Pre-teaching vocabulary is really important, and finding ways to do that, such as what photos can help reinforce vocabulary, what activities can be done before and after. Are there any books that link particular vocabulary that the children can then quickly be exposed to again? Can you use songs or rhymes to reinforce vocabulary and that sort of thing? Bear in mind as well, children who might be coming with prior literacy experience in their own in their native language. It can be an asset, but it can actually become something to overcome as well. If a child's quite proficient with literacy in their own language, and there are some differences, such as phonological differences. I in Polish is mostly pronounced E, so that can be something that we need to just be aware of and pick up on. Sometimes there aren't specific sounds in other languages, like the bus sound. So more time is generally needed with GBC, grapheme phoneme correspondence on that one. And then over to Georgina.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, so my part is looking at supporting readers with SEND, something I'm quite passionate about. And I think it's really important. I've put on here some various different special educational needs diagnoses that might impact on reading. And I really want to emphasize that this is might, because obviously every child is unique, and as are their specific needs. So these types of SEND can impact on a learner's ability to read, but it may not. So, you should never judge someone just by their diagnosis. But if we look at dyslexia, for example, to start with, I think that's one that a lot of us are familiar with when we're thinking about reading and we're thinking about SEND. Often we think dyslexia might be an area that impacts on reading, but it's not just on reading and writing that dyslexia impacts. It's actually on the processing skills and their organisation skills and their working memory. So there's a lot more going on that might be impacting on their reading ability. The next one I put underneath there, if you look in purple, is, oh sorry, go back, Pete. I said next. I shouldn't have said that word, should I? Visual stress or Erlen syndrome. Now that one's really interesting because a lot of people sort of muddle that one and dyslexia together when they're two separate things. And visual stress isn't a problem with sight or vision or a person's eyes, but it's a difficulty again with processing and making sense of visual information. And there appears sometimes as this overlap with visual stress and dyslexia, which is why sometimes people muddle the two together, but they're not the same. And there are also overlaps with other special educational needs like autism, ADHD and dyslexia. The next one I put on there is speech, language and communication needs, SLCN. And I think that one, there's a huge link, isn't there, between speech, language, communication needs and literacy. It makes sense that if you're struggling to communicate, you're struggling to use words, etc., it's going to make reading more difficult, or can make reading more difficult. So that's one to be aware of. If you've got children in your class who you're aware have got speech, language, communication needs, then they may find their reading a little bit more challenging. Again, may, not always. ADHD, again, some, but certainly not all children with ADHD might find literacy difficult. Worth having on your radar if you know there's a child with a diagnosis of ADHD. They might find it hard to concentrate whilst reading and writing. They may find that they've got hyperfocus and they're absolutely brilliant at concentrating on reading and writing. But they may also find things like the comprehension task difficult to scan through the text, find the information, then look at the next bit of paper where it's got questions and then think back to the piece of paper. So things like that can be a little bit challenging for some children with ADHD. I put hyperlexia on there as well, which is a really interesting one. I could talk for about an hour on hyperlexia, so I won't do that because that's not fair on anybody at this time in the evening. But hyperlexia is one I would really recommend looking into. These are these children, quite often you see them it comes in like newspaper articles. You've probably seen them where it's like child age 3 taught themselves to read all by themselves, child genius. And these children often, but again, not always, because we mustn't generalise, can have something called hyperlexia. And some hyperlexic children are also autistic. And hyperlexia isn't a diagnosis in itself, but it's this incredible ability for children to be able to teach themselves to be able to read beyond their years, really early on, often before school, completely by themselves. And often when I do presentations, someone will say, oh, I've taught a child like that. I know one like that. I've taught somebody who's hyperlexic. I'm like, amazing children. And often the problem, and I've put it as somebody who might need further support, and you're probably thinking, well, if they can read before they've arrived at school, why on earth would they need some further support? But the difficulty is these children are so brilliant at reading that quite often the comprehension side of things, or the meaning of the words that they're reading, or extra things like that can become a little bit difficult. Or perhaps they're finding it so easy that they're then coasting a little bit and they need that extra stretch. So yeah, one to research, one I find particularly interesting. We've also got on there Down syndrome. Again, not all children with Down syndrome will find reading difficult. Some will. Sometimes it can be in part due to difficulties with phonological awareness and word decoding, so that's one to be aware of. GDD, which is global development delay. Again, this means a child can take longer than their peers to reach certain developmental milestones. So if you've got a child on your SEND register at school and they've got a global development delay, they may have some literacy difficulties as well. Vision impairment or low vision, which kind of makes sense, doesn't it? If you've got a vision impairment, it means that it might make it slightly difficult to access the curriculum, but we can support these children. We can support all these children to make sure reading is more accessible. And I've put autism on there. Again, not all children, but it can sometimes impact on areas of literacy. Next slide, please, Pete. Actually meant it this time. So how can you support learners with SEND who've got reading difficulties in the classroom? So remember, not all children with SEND are going to have reading difficulties. Some might. I think there's so many different things you can do. And I think it's about trying lots of different things, giving these things time to see if they work, and not being afraid of trying new things. You're not going to do anything wrong by putting new strategies in, but trying new things. It's not going to be detrimental to do any of these things. And actually, a lot of these strategies are just high quality teaching that will be really helpful for all students in your lessons. So yeah, they're useful. First one is giving time. It sounds really obvious, but just giving time to be able to read, to organise thoughts, to process stuff. And that can be really important for children who need longer to process information. Providing more opportunities. I think we've covered that a little bit. The ideas, I think Pete came up with some brilliant suggestions, with having, and we said about author visits and all of that sort of stuff, visits to the library, etc. Just thinking about different ways you can engage children with, yes, Emma, what works for SEND often does work for all. I completely agree. Yeah, so thinking about different ways we can engage children in learning, because a lot of children, if they found reading particularly difficult due to their SEND, they might also not be very engaged with reading. So we need to think about how to hook them in. And one thing I would massively recommend for opportunities is putting the subtitles on absolutely everything, because the children are reading at the same time as watching TV or watching a YouTube video. We put them on at the moment at home just for my children. They don't have SEND, but it means that when me and my husband watch Netflix on an evening, we now have to watch it with subtitles because we've forgotten to turn them off. But I'm sure it's improving my literacy skills. Other things I put on there is multisensory techniques. So multisensory means using more than one sense during an activity. So that could be sight and touch, etc. We've got some brilliant sensory stories, little plug for Twinkl there, that are fantastic at using all of the different senses. Supporting with visuals. So for children who are finding it difficult to read, giving context with pictures, with visuals is really helpful. There's so much I could say about this, but we've got the original books, which are fantastic. We've got the Twinkl Symbols original book in particular on there, which is brilliant. We've got colourful semantic stories. We've got BSL sign stories. We've got the Key Stage 2 picture books. We've got all sorts of things that can help you with that side. Twinkl comics, for example, as well. Other things we can be doing is being a reading role model, like we said, so making sure children see us reading, know that we like reading, we talk about reading, etc. Also telling them if we find it difficult. So not all teachers will have found reading easy as well. So telling them if we find it a little bit difficult as well. Chunking information, so lengthy text in books, making sure it's got, and a lot of our texts do this, but having gaps in between and pictures in between to make it a little bit easier for dyslexic learners. Using your teaching assistant, if you're still lucky enough to have one, effectively. Thinking about your use of technology, which we've already talked about. And this last one, which I think is so important, is reducing unnecessary pressure. So just because we've always made children read out loud doesn't mean they have to read out loud in front of the class. If that's not going to benefit that child at that moment in time, and I'm not saying they'll never be able to do it, but in that moment in time, if that is too much pressure, thinking, can they just read to their peer their friend next to them at that moment? Or can they read to a small group? Or can they read to the teaching assistant or you? Do they need to read in front of the whole class in that year group at the moment, or is that something we're going to work towards? And thinking about what is it we're actually trying to assess here. Do we need to be making them read in front of loads of people? The other thing is looking at comprehensions as well. So comprehension, if you're doing a comprehension where you're reading and then you're answering questions, do they need to also write it? Because if you've got dyslexia and you're struggling, for example, with reading and with writing, and you've got to read the text, then you've got to write the answer. Maybe they could just say the comprehension bit out loud. Maybe they could give the answers out loud just to take away that extra barrier. Next slide, Pete, please. And then I've put on here resources, and I noticed there was a question about resources as well, I think, asking if we had access to these, and we will show access. I think you'll be able to click through a lot of these things when we send the slides. But resources you can use to help children with SEND. So accessible reading materials are really important. We've spoken a lot about this, but examples include, audio support, ebooks of audio versions, which we've got on there. These Rhino Reader books now that we have that are available with the custom books are fantastic. So if you haven't looked at that, please have a look at that, because that's really, really important and really brilliant. And then we've also got, you can use reader pens. They're fantastic for reading text out loud for children who find that difficult. And then things like highlighters and sticky notes. Sounds ridiculous, but they're really, really useful tools, aren't they, that we can highlight key information, maybe not on your special books, but on some text when they're reading it, so they can find the key information out themselves, or they can write notes on sticky notes. So really thinking about different resources you can use to support learners with SEND. And then my next two bits, and I will be quick because I am aware of the time, but whenever I do this, people say, well, what about what happens if this doesn't work? And if we've got children where phonics isn't working, is phonics actually suitable for everybody? And the guidance is saying yes for pretty much all students, all children, apart from, I think it's 0.1% of the school population. So if you are thinking that phonics isn't working, and we mentioned this earlier, the guidance still is that phonics is the best approach. So Ofsted are saying some pupils with SEND will probably need a lot more practice, secure, important phonics knowledge. It doesn't mean it's not working. And I think Emma covered quite a lot of this. It's the overlearning, it's small groups, it's being flexible with your approach, it's pre-teaching, it's all of those things that we do brilliantly. But just remembering it does work. We just need to keep at it really and keep trying different ways, but keeping the consistency of the same approach. And the next slide, I think, is from the DFE quote as well. Similar thing, they're backing it up. So consensus is growing among academics and teachers that the best reading instruction for pupils with SEND is SSP taught by direct instruction. And like I said, the only children really that the research is saying it doesn't work for is 0.1% of the school population, and most of those children are going to be the ones who've got profound and multiple learning disabilities, and they would tend more likely to attend specialist SEND settings. So if you're a mainstream teacher, the vast majority of your pupils should benefit, according to the research, from your phonics training. And I'm aware of the time, so I will sum up there. We are aware that this session has sold out. That was quite exciting to find that out. If your colleagues want to come along, or you want to tell your colleagues to come along, we are doing another one on Monday. 3rd of March is Monday, that's correct, isn't it? Yep. 3rd of March is Monday at 10 a.m. So if you'd like to recommend this to somebody else, that would be lovely of you. And they can sign up via that link on the slides that we're going to send. And am I reading the bit I'm supposed to read still? Yes, I am. No, but it's over to you. Who's next? Is it you, Emma?
Nicola was going to talk about this.
Yeah, I think it's me.
Sorry, there was the colour coding and I failed.
Hey,
There's
no
a blue colour coding there.
Yeah, just to flag that we have on the 5th of March at 4 p.m. Another TeachMeet. So this is me and another 2 colleagues, and this is a whole school approach to reading. So in that TeachMeet, we'll be covering the role of the reading lead, for example, and looking at some sort of strategies to really embed that sort of culture of reading from a whole school perspective. Back to you, Emma.
And this is me this time. Another TeachMeet that the wonderful Becky Porter and I are running about whether phonics does work. So we'll be looking at phonics, we'll be looking at other skills, what's the best way to use all of those things to teach children to read, and what about those children who you're finding phonics feels like it isn't working, what could you try? Becky Porter works on the phonics team and was one of the people that created our validated DAFE validated phonics scheme. So she'll be bringing a lot of that knowledge, and I'll be bringing my knowledge from the other side. Next. We've also included on the slides for you to have a look at after our reading hub, which has got not just originals, not just phonics, but all of our reading offer on there for you to browse and find things that could support you with individual children, but also groups and in schools. And our inclusion hub, which is not just about reading, it's about lots of different strategies and resources that you can use to, yes, include everyone in your teaching. Next slide. And just in case people didn't know about them, we have these send workstations in our Twinkl phonics game, which can be really useful if you have someone that responds well to working in this way with workstations. So that link will also be on the slides for you to have a look at.